Hi, I'm very sorry not to be there in person, but I'm also thrilled to still be able to present on this really fascinating topic. So, the power of the gut-brain connection, food, mood, and microbes. And I am Dr. Emily Leeming. I am a registered dietitian and a microbiome researcher at King's College London. So, I will very much be coming at this from the perspective of our microbiome and also food as well. So what is the gut microbiome? It is this complex system, this ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and archaea that live in our large intestine. So we have about 100 trillion of them. So for context, that is more than we have stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Recently, we've had a bit of a recount, and actually we're about equivalent to 1-to-1 in terms of bacterial to human cells. So if aliens were to come down from space, they would think that we weren't actually fully human, that perhaps we're a hybrid species. And we have about 200 to 1,000 bacterial species in our gut. And it's very much kind of unique to us. So we don't really have, very much exactly the same microbiome as someone else. We only share about 1/3 of our gut microbiome. So that makes our microbiome as unique as a fingerprint. And it's also not a static thing. It's very much this kind of living ecosystem that changes throughout life, kind of first colonizing the gut shortly kind of after or at birth, and continue to kind of gather new members from the environment throughout life. It's very much been in the last 20 years we've had this kind of avalanche of research that's suddenly kind of been explored in this area. And I've really come to understand that the microbiome is seen as kind of a cornerstone of health and how it's so interrelated with so many different parts of our body and as far reaching as our brain. And it's not simply just another kind of bit player in our digestive system. It's very much involved in our health due to its production of short-chain fatty acids. It helps to regulate and train our immune system. It produces neurotransmitters, vitamins, amino acids, and it also influences how we metabolize drugs as well. So our gut and our brain are constantly talking to each other. And this is something actually, if we think about how we talk about gut instinct and gut feeling, we talk about having butterflies in our stomach, that actually we have this acknowledgement of this connection in our day-to-day language already. We've also known about this connection more from the side of talking about the regulation of food intake. So we've known for a long time that when we eat, it initiates the release of hunger and fullness gut hormones, which feed back to the brain to regulate food intake. And likewise, there's this acknowledgement that eating certain foods can be pleasurable, and that connection that way as well from food to our brain. Likewise, from our brain back down to our gut, where we've been aware of the flight or fight response, where kind of going back to kind of caveman era of kind of running away from a predator, when our stress hormones increase and our cortisol levels rush up, that can talk to our gut and lead us to rushing to the loo. And perhaps that's kind of related to wanting us to be able to run faster if we're feeling a little bit lighter. So more recently, research is kind of illuminating exactly how the microbiome and the gut bacteria kind of talk to our brain. For example, many of them produce short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate and acetate, which can influence brain activity, and others can generate a chemical called GABA, where deficits of this are linked to depression. So there's many kind of communication pathways that kind of link these two together. And I'm just going to touch kind of briefly on how those are kind of connected and what we know about them so far. So the communication really happens both ways. And although the brain is very much the CEO of our body, actually most of the communication happens in the other direction. So 90% of the talk between the gut and the brain happens from the gut to the brain. So if we look to the image to the right, we can see that the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which describes the nerves kind of outside the brain, outside of the spinal cord. And it is these nerves that kind of regulate the physiological processes that keep us automatically alive, such as breathing and our heart rate, and also our digestion. So it's made up of three different parts. We have the enteric nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the enteric nervous system kind of controls the activity of the digestive tract of your digestion, and it's embedded in the walls of your intestine. And actually, it contains kind of millions of neurons lining your gut. It can function completely independently from your brain. And actually, there are more nerves than all the other peripheral nerves together. And this is why it's called our second brain. So although it can't write poetry or send a text message, it is very much an extensive network that uses the same chemicals and cells as the brain to help us digest, and also to kind of alert the brain when something is amiss. So it's also connected to both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. So the sympathetic system is our fight or flight response. It's switched on in response to danger, as I kind of mentioned a few slides before. And this is where your kind of digestion is inhibited. Your parasympathetic nervous system is your kind of rest and digest nervous system. So this is kind of enhancing digestion. And they both work together very much as a balancing act. So almost like driving a car. So, you know, sometimes you need to put your foot on the gas to kind of make things go forward, and sometimes you need to put your foot on the brake. And the microbiome is kind of involved in regulating and being kind of closely involved in these processes as well. So the vagus nerve is really kind of a key player in this talk. It's the kind of chief, kind of one of the chief cranial nerves that connect and run down from your brain to your abdomen. And it's linking kind of your internal organs, including your gut, to the brain. And it's very much kind of sending signals back and forth as if it's kind of a communication highway from the gut and back to the brain and back again. So when the evidence of the microbiome kind of communicating in this way, I think is shown really clearly in kind of mice models, where when they're given a certain type of probiotic called a psychobiotic, which is shown to have an influence on mood or stress, where with mice that have severed vagus nerves, they don't respond to these certain psychobiotics, clearly showing that the vagus nerve is a key pathway for certain bacteria types. And there's kind of a mounting evidence in humans as well of kind of its role in appetite regulation, mood, and inflammation. The other pathways too are, for example, the neuroendocrine system, which is made up of kind of nerves and gland cells, and it makes hormones and releases them into the bloodstream. So the microbiome produces kind of many hormone type chemicals that, you know, also release. So they all can produce short chain fatty acids, which induce the release of hormones and neuropeptides. And they're also kind of closely involved with the HPA axis. So these are kind of three glands that help to regulate the stress response, and they're involved in kind of energy, mood, and metabolism. And then we have the other pathway we want to talk about is the immune system. So from birth, your immune system is exposed to microbes, and actually these microbes help to train your immune system. And, you know, 80% of your immune cells live in your gut. There's very much this kind of two-way relationship between your gut microbes and the immune system. And so some of the bacteria act to suppress the activity of the immune cells and cause inflammation, but other bacteria enhance that immune response. So it's very much kind of closely involved between the two. So kind of a quick kind of summary is that, you know, we have signals through the nerves to the brain. We have kind of metabolites into the stream. So metabolites being kind of any kind of the molecules produced by the gut microbiome that can then act on our body in different sites elsewhere. And they can also signal through the immune cells. One thing I wanted to note on, because I do think this gets talked about quite a bit, the fact that 95% of serotonin, which is kind of talked about as being the happy hormone, is made in the gut. But however, I do want to kind of share that the kind of gut produced serotonin can't actually cross the blood-brain barrier. So it doesn't actually, we don't think that this actually is having effect on our mood. Actually, what the serotonin we think does in our gut is that it actually helps to help the digestive process, really helping things to kind of keep moving through and that kind of transit through our gut. What we do think, however, is that tryptophan, which is an amino acid that is a precursor to multiple different types of neurotransmitters, and is also the precursor to serotonin, the microbiome do help to make tryptophan. And at this being a precursor to serotonin, and it can cross the blood-brain barrier. So perhaps there's kind of early insight into that potentially having an effect there. So before we kind of go any further, I do think that this is very much an early kind of area of research. And at the moment we have mostly mice studies, which, really great kind of preclinical evidence to signal where we want to be looking at in the future. But of course, mice are not humans. So there's kind of also some caution that we need to kind of take here. Is there kind of some lost in translation from mice to humans? And we also need to consider that, are we looking at what are kind of associations? So we're seeing something linked to something else, but isn't necessarily caused by that. So it's kind of, we've got, I think this area is going to continue to skyrocket, and it's very exciting. So we're getting some really interesting insights into this, but it's still very much of a developing area that we want to know more about. So I'm going to talk quickly about mental health and what the relationship is with our microbiome. So we know that there is a link between mood disorders and what we call gut dysbiosis. And this is really kind of an imbalanced gut microbiome where we're seeing perhaps more pro-inflammatory types of gut bacteria and also a lower diversity. So it's been characterized that certain bacteria types that produce the pleasure chemical dopamine are also kind of found in lower abundances in those with depression. And also in mice, we see that you can kind of transfer the blues. So what happened was that they took fecal samples from humans with major depression and implanted them into the kind of previously bacteria-free rats. And these rats became anxious and disinterested in pleasurable activities. Irritable bowel syndrome is also a really kind of, I've kind of put here in mental health because it's actually really high prevalence of mental health cases in conjunction with irritable bowel syndrome. And it was actually reclassified as a disease of gut-brain axis dysregulation in 2016. And negative life experiences, such as kind of witnessing violence or kind of mental illness in the family or kind of abuse, are seen as risk factors for irritable bowel syndrome. And, we then see this kind of very much a different gut microbiome profile as well in those with IBS versus those that are healthy. And what we see is that in 50% of cases where gut symptoms appear first, mood and anxiety symptoms can follow. So it's very much kind of a strong kind of candidate for being able to describe this relationship. So food and mood, and does food influence our mood? So before we even kind of get to talking about the microbiome. So there's lots of large observational studies which show that of all dietary patterns, the Mediterranean diet is kind of strongly linked to a lower risk of depression. And likewise, we see kind of on the other side that diets high in ultra-processed foods are linked to higher risk of depression. But it was in 2017 where really researchers wanted to see that is this, simply an association, or is this something that we can look at and see if it's actually a cause and effect? So the researchers led by Felice Jacka in Australia did a 12-week randomized control trial, and they looked at people with moderate to severe depression who had poor quality diet, and they put half of them onto social support only, and the other half were kind of encouraged with one-to-one with a dietitian to eat a Mediterranean-style dietary pattern. What they found after the 12 weeks was that the group that changed their diet, 32% of them achieved remission in depression versus 8% in the social support group. So that's kind of huge, that's very kind of that impressive kind of numbers after the 12 weeks. So this really kind of showed actually that there is a cause and effect likely here, and we've kind of had other kind of research coming out after this to kind of help flesh this out more. And it was really interesting as well that they saw that kind of symptom relief also positively correlated with improvements in a Mediterranean diet as well. So very exciting kind of early stages there that's kind of then signposted for future research since 2017 in this area. One thing that I think is interesting from kind of a dietitian perspective is that kind of low mood and stress can change the way we eat too. So we get kind of an altered appetite. We can seek comfort foods, perhaps sweet, salty, fatty foods. And also, when this is very much kind of a symptom that we see from people with depression, is that there's kind of this intense fatigue and tiredness and kind of low motivation to cook and low desire to cook and shop for food. So I think there's something that we really need to be kind of very kind of considerate of, and that I think we've got to be very kind of careful in how we talk about the relationship between food and mood, because it's so much more complex than just and how we make our food choices are a lot more complex than simply perhaps it seems on the tin when you're trying to do a very, very quick presentation. So we feed our microbes, we feed our brain. So factors that influence the microbiome and the function of the gut microbiome include many different factors, and which I'm only going to touch on diet today, being the key kind of modifiable contributor to our microbiome. So we are recommended for general health and well-being to eat 30 grams of fibre a day or more. And sadly, in the UK, we only achieve about kind of 18 grams on average as a population. So we're still not really quite getting there. If in terms of the microbiome and how, in order to help it to grow and to support and flourish, there's many different types of fibre, and there's specifically a group of fibre called prebiotic fibre, which have kind of proven microbiome modulation kind of linked with health benefits. And these kind of include inulin, fructooligosaccharides, and galactooligosaccharides, which can be found in kind of garlic, onion, leeks, asparagus, whole grains, and more. And these kind of really provide kind of a feast for our microbiome to live on. They kind of, multiple health benefits from improving kind of absorption of nutrients and modulating our immune system, modulating satiety, and kind of improving bowel habits as well. And these can really be found in any kind of, we talk very much about plants being kind of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, fruits, and spices. So in terms of prebiotics and mood, I very much wanted to look at a kind of human studies and what do we know from the human studies to date. So in healthy people, 3 weeks of galactooligosaccharides were found to kind of significantly reduce kind of cortisol, waking cortisol response. And kind of we naturally have higher cortisol levels in the morning. and shifted focus from negative to positive images. What they didn't find in this study was that they didn't notice the participants didn't notice any notable difference in their mood. So there wasn't a significant shift there. But I think what is interesting in this is that this shift in focus from negative to positive images is actually to do with your kind of emotional framework, and that underlies mood itself. So perhaps if this had been for a longer period of time, the researchers kind of thought perhaps there could be a signal there. But I think it does show that perhaps there is a relationship in terms of your emotional framework, but there's more to know in terms of mood. Likewise, in healthy group as well, they grouped participants into high and low anxiety traits, and actually 4 weeks of galacto-oligosaccharides reduced the self-reported anxiety scores in those being highly anxious but not low-level anxiety. So again, perhaps it's something to do with needing to have more of an issue rather than being kind of too generally healthy, not being able to see effect very clearly. However, there has been a meta-analysis of randomized control trials where they showed that prebiotics did not differ from placebo for depression or anxiety. So I think there's still kind of confusion around whether there is something going on or not. This is very early stage from what we see, although we have seen this kind of very clearly in mice models. In terms of our microbiome, the other thing that our gut bacteria like to feed on are polyphenols. So these are the kind of colours that they're a group of antioxidants that provide colours in fruits and vegetables. And they also have a kind of prebiotic-like effect. So 95% of them reach the lower intestine, in which our kind of bacteria kind of feed on them. And kind of different groups have been found to be linked to kind of lower risks of depression. So another kind of group, which isn't a polyphenol, but similar to polyphenols, are carotenoids found in kind of yellow fruits and vegetables, and also kind of contribute to better cognitive performances. So we very much kind of see kind of early interest in polyphenols and their similar groupings as well. In terms of other foods for our gut, most evidence in terms of live ferments, most evidence to date are on the benefits of kefir, and there's kind of limited evidence actually around kombucha yet. We don't actually have any human studies on kombucha, but 6 portions a day of fermented foods for 10 weeks has been linked to greater microbial diversity and lower inflammation, and actually replacing 400 grams of kind of processed foods with 400 grams of kind of high microbe containing foods, which kind of include fruits and vegetables and ferments as well, has been linked to kind of better kind of health measures. And these kind of ferments don't just include sauerkraut or kimchi, but it's also kind of live yogurt, cottage cheese, and kind of other kind of live cheeses as well. So probiotics have been more extensively tested as a potential therapeutic for low mood and depression than prebiotics to date. So we do have a lot more evidence around psychobiotics at the moment. So we have seen some kind of early evidence around different kind of some particular kind of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium kind of strains, which have potentially reduced anxiety and depression symptoms. However, in general, we haven't really seen kind of this translation, do not always kind of translate to humans. And really what the kind of meta-analysis, again, which is kind of a higher level of evidence, have shown that actually probiotics are effective in reducing depressive symptoms when administered in addition to antidepressants. So they may not seem to give any benefits unless they're given in conjunction with antidepressants. So that can be, something really interesting for the future as a kind of therapeutic tool. So what next? Gut bacteria does influence the brain and behavior, but causation in humans does remain unclear. So there's a lot more that we do need to know in this area. And I think, this is very much kind of a hot topical at the moment. So we'll know a lot more, I think, in the next coming years as we have more study and more research on this, and potentially could be used as a kind of therapeutic intervention. So as a summary, we have a powerful bidirectional communication between our gut and our brain, mediated by our gut microbiomes, but mostly mice to date, with human beings being quite complex. We do see that food influences our mood, and this could be a complementary tool for mental well-being. We do need more human studies, though, and causation investigations, particularly regarding the microbiome. But in terms of microbiome advice, we want to add in fiber polyphenol diversity, and keep getting our plants in. So please do reach out and let me know if you have any questions. Very happy to answer them, and I'm sure the panel following will you'll be kind of well provided for in terms of answering any questions on this topic as well. Thank you.
How many of you are doctors, out of interest? Whoa. Okay, quite a few.
A lot.
How many are dietitians? Great. Nurses? Good, okay, 3. What about allied healthcare professionals or coaches? Yeah, okay, good. So just a good idea to get an idea of the mix. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about my conflicts of interest. I'm going to promote my book, of course, because I wrote it and I like it and I think it's good. So this is my book, The Plant Powered Doctor, and I wrote it because it's what I would have wanted to have in my hands at the beginning of my career, not only for me to read, but also to give to patients, because although it contains some high-level science and over 600 references, it's also suitable for the layperson. That's what was important to me, that anybody could read it and enjoy. I've also written chapters for other books, one of which is being sold here today. And in terms of other conflicts of interest, I have been a scientific advisor for a supplement company called Emil from Australia, and I've been paid various honorariums for presentations and academic work, and I've also contributed to 3 of the Happy Pear lifestyle change courses. They are 2 plant-based chefs based in Ireland that run courses in conjunction with allied healthcare professionals and doctors, and advisory work for several brands, none of which I'm promoting today. So to understand today's lecture and what we're going to talk about, essentially, I want you to understand the importance of your role. I want you to understand the importance that you can have in your patient's journey or your client's journey. So many of us think, oh, well, what's 5 minutes difference is that going to make? And I don't think I'm going to have enough time, and I don't think they're going to listen to me. And actually, it can be something really significant. And I want to just share a little bit about that with you. I'm going to share with you some motivational interviewing techniques, which many of you might have already learnt at some distant past, but it's good to get that reminder. And there's a few other tips and tricks that I've added to the presentation, as well as my own unique Blend It motivational tool that will help you to remember how to address these issues with your patients and clients. Because in the heat of the moment, or after a very busy day, you can sometimes forget these things. And I do know what it's like, because I've been there. I've been a doctor for nearly 20 years. And I've had those kind of days where it's just a really long day, you're exhausted, you've got admin piling up, you've got difficult patients, you've got complaints, you're feeling pretty fed up. You look at your patient list, you see Mrs. Khan on the list, and you think, oh no, she's not going to listen to me. She's got high blood pressure, she's got diabetes, she's suffering with obesity, she's got arthritic pains, she's all over body pains. And I know I've seen her before and she hasn't listened to me, and she's going to come in with some vague symptoms and I don't know what to do with them, and is it really worth it? Am I going to make a difference? I've had those feelings, and I'm sure you've had those feelings too. And the truth is, on a lot of days I used to feel this way myself, and you sort of wonder, well, what's the point? Well, I have to say, there is a point, and I promise you that they are listening, and your input into their lives is probably worth a lot more than you could ever imagine. And with that in mind, I do want to talk to you about something called the domino effect, which is, I suppose, just an example of things that you can't always measure or predict in a scientific way. So you can imagine you've got a patient, say he's in his early 60s, and he's got early onset arthritis, and as his healthcare provider or as his coach, you tell him, it might be worth getting a little bit more exercise. So he decides, maybe, okay, I'll go to the local park, I'll have a little walk. And when he goes to the park, he notices there's a lot of dog walkers around, and he thinks, I'm going to retire soon. Maybe I'll get an animal companion. So he goes to the dog shelter, he gets himself a dog, and then he goes to the park every day. And then when he goes to the park every day, he meets a lovely lady who's got her dog as well, and they start chatting. And then they chat the next morning, and then they chat the next morning after that. And then they slowly but surely begin to chat outside of their little park dates, and they go for lunch, go for dinner, they fall in love, and they live happily ever after. Now, you might be thinking, well, promoting a plant-based diet doesn't mean that you're going to meet the love of your life, but I think what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it's really hard to measure the onwards effect of a simple intervention, and the possibilities for an improved life are truly boundless. And I think it's just important to know that off the bat. Now, I would like to share with you something very special. My patients gave me permission to share this with you because they were so excited about some of the changes they'd experienced. And I'd love for you to give them your full attention. It's just a 4 to 5 minute video of a few of my patients sharing some of the benefits that they'd experienced when they started to eat a plant-based diet.
The process actually started with my first meeting with one new doctor. She's a younger doctor. She's a new generation of doctors.
I lost my HGV license due to high blood pressure.
The problem was that I'd collapsed.
I thought that I was going to come in and sit with Dr. Newman, and she was going to say, there's nothing you can do about it, you're just going to have to live with it.
Sometime back I was feeling very lethargic and depression sort of things.
I developed Crohn's disease, just wouldn't clear up, wouldn't stop.
I was diagnosed with polymyalgia rheumatica.
I had angina, had an angioplasty, arthritis, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Then I got prostate cancer, and when I got that call to say that it was all clear, boy, yes! To suddenly have an option of giving up the medication, I took her advice. And it's like, for me, it's like being in a prison and suddenly you're released. That's what it felt like. We need to get the message out there. We need people to know. There are older people suffering like I did, who had no idea that all they had to do was buy vegetables.
My motivation to switch was to do with how I was feeling, and assumed, because of my age, that it was kind of hormone based. She said something completely different, which actually made me think people that were plant-based were other people. It's given me my life back again.
What the doctor discovered was that I had a very high blood pressure on the day that I came, which was, I believe, to be 212. A few weeks later, it had gone down to about 140 odd to 150. The amazing thing I noticed, I felt a lot better, it's improved my way of life, and instead of feeling coming up to 82 years of age, I feel like I'm 62.
She introduced me to a more plant-based diet within the first 3 days. I started feeling better within the first 3 days. When I came back after the 2 weeks, and my blood pressure count was so dramatically reduced, it was amazing. And then I could get back to work. I just felt elated. I never believed that a diet could make such a dramatic impact on your life.
The main things I've been struggling with and suffering with is Crohn's disease, primary sclerosing cholangitis, kidney disease and asthma. When I made the switch, the things that I noticed, I wasn't bloated anymore, and the marvellous thing was I wasn't running to the toilet anymore, which has been a nightmare, to be honest. Also, I felt much better in myself. I was breathing better. My tummy seemed much more calmer. You know, didn't have this awful pain all the time that I always experienced. The kidney specialist, as I say, was absolutely shocked when the readings were so good. And also the Crohn's specialist also has now said he doesn't need to see me. So I haven't been to see the Crohn's specialist now for nearly 2 years.
I'm feeling a lot healthier, happier, and very fit in life. I was taking blood pressure medicine and also the medicine for my diabetes. I need no more of these medicines. I'm doing without medicine. I'm on a good diet, and that diet has been the main element of making me back to a normal life.
And it got to the state that I couldn't get out of bed, and I was very, very distressed. And I was so upset because I care for my husband and I couldn't care for him. So it made me very sad. Dr. Newman actually gave me a diet. Actually, to eat in these foods, everything of my body is working okay. And I find that all plant-based foods now help my joints, and I don't feel half as stiff as I used to. And so I've got a feeling that cutting out red meats and going to plant-based foods helps my polymyalgia rheumatica.
Well, you're never too old. You're never too old to change.
I would recommend everybody try plant-based diet.
Well, it's given me my life back.
I would definitely recommend others.
It definitely works. Plant-based foods improve your life. It's as simple as that. Give it a go.
I always get emotional watching that. They're so lovely, and I'm so grateful to them because they were willing to share a little bit about their lives with you. And also, you can see that they're ordinary people. You know, they're people like you and me, and they are doing their best with what they have, and yet they are doing the extraordinary. And it's things like that that can really help you to feel as though you're making a difference in people's lives. But it's also important to remember that it is their achievement. This is something that comes from them and the efforts that they make. So that's why it's so important to get them on board psychologically, which is why I have created a motivational template that will hopefully help you to do that. And it's called Blend It. Blend It. And it stands for, as you will see, believe, listen, evoke, no bossing, desire, information, and timed. So blend it. And I'm going to go through each one in turn so you can understand a little bit more about what they mean. And so the first thing, believe. Hopefully you will have already done some of your reading before coming to VegMed conference this weekend, and you'll be learning a lot from the speakers today and tomorrow. I'm not going into the science of plant-based nutrition today, but obviously you will know some of that. It is important to both believe that the intervention that you are suggesting could potentially work for your patient, and it's also important to believe that they are capable of making changes. This sounds basic, but it's really important because it's that therapeutic relationship that you build with your patient or client, even in that first 10 minutes of being together, that will really determine how motivated they feel to make a start, and how motivated they feel to continue, and how motivated they feel to really reap those rewards. So you have to believe the intervention that you are recommending has potential benefits, and you have to also believe that they are capable. Because sometimes what happens is when you're in a consultation, you sort of close your mind to possibilities. You think, I've seen this person 100 times before and they're not going to listen. Or this person looks like this, they're not going to make a difference in their lives. I've seen this before. And it's important to use that pattern recognition, but use it in a way that's positive for your patient rather than in a potentially judgmental way. And this is just something, again, that I wanted to highlight. It's called the meaning response. And what it is your ability as a coach or as a clinician to really help your patient believe in themselves, to help them to imagine that they can make a change. And it is more arguable than the placebo effect, so which we know from studies on various drug trials to be quite significant. So the L in Blend It is listen, or look and listen. less relevant when you're doing telephone consultations, but when you're doing patient consultations or client consultations online or face-to-face, it is crucial to actually look at your patient. And that sounds basic, but we don't. We look at our screens and we type like this. And I do it too. But one of the things that I always make time for at the very beginning of my consultation is to notice what eye colour my patient has, what they're wearing, and what their facial expression is as they sit down. And I'll also say to them, I'm just going to do a little bit of typing so that they understand that I am listening and that I have actually taken the time before I start typing to actually look at them and ask them the initial question. It's important information. You'll remember from medical school if you're a doctor, and I'm sure other allied professionals also learn about this. What do they look like? What is their affect? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they in pain? Do they limp? Are they hobbling? Do they smell bad? It's important. It's important to know. It's important to look at how dishevelled they are. It's important to look at all of the little cues, even things like jewellery. Makeup. It's very important because the effort that someone puts into their appearance and the social group that they put themselves in actually determine what they believe themselves to be capable of as well. So it is an important thing to look at. Also, it's easy to forget, but reflective listening. So it's all very well listening, but how do you show them that you have been listening? How do they know that you've been listening? And one of the things that I like to use in my consultations is reflective listening. So it means not just repeating back what they've said, but trying to infer some sort of meaning from that thing. So repetition is good because it shows you are listening. So you can say, oh, so what you've just told me is that you've had 2 weeks of pain in your elbow and it's a 5 out of 10 intensity, and you notice it more when you try to do cooking, and you've noticed that it gets worse when you try to sleep. And that's basically what they've told you, and you've repeated it back, so they know that you were listening. But you can also infer meaning from that. So you can ask them an additional question. You can say something like, well, how has this been affecting your life? An open question, a broad question. And again, it allows them the time to be heard, essentially. And this is really important for several reasons. You need to make your patient feel heard and understood in order for them to begin to think about creating that sort of relationship with you. It actually allows them to feel as though you've spent more time with them than you really have. Studies have shown that when you do this kind of motivational interviewing techniques and you show that you've been listening and you reflect it back to them, they feel as though you spent far longer with them than the actual amount of minutes that you've spent, which is important because then they feel as though they are important to you. The other thing is that it actually does save you time. Again, there are studies to show that if you look at consultations and you break it down, how much time spent listening, reflecting on the patient's concerns at the beginning, dictates how long the consultation runs overall. It actually is shorter than if you rush through and try to address everything very quickly and don't really listen. And lastly, of course, it helps with the healing that can come with human connection, which I think is really important part of the consultation. So one of the things that I like to think of is trying to find something to actually like about them and genuinely like. So it has to be real. And if you feel as though it's appropriate, you can share that thing with them. So something that you've noticed about what they've managed to achieve or how they've managed to get through something difficult, or empathizing how hard it must have been and how amazing it is that they've been able to get through X, Y, Z. You have to mean it, but if you say it and you mean it, it makes a big difference. And again, it's just another thing that will help them to feel as though they can make changes in their lives. Blend it. Again, we've got believe is the B, L is the listen and look, E is evoke. Now, why is this important? Evoking their imagination is really helpful because it allows them to think about the possibilities that they hadn't yet even considered before. So there's two things integral to evoking behaviour change. The first is engaging them in their memory. So you help them to remember when they've actually achieved behaviour change in the past and what helped them to do it. It's actually quite hard to think of unless you're told to think of it. You can sometimes have a selective memory and things can feel terrible and awful and you don't think you've ever been able to get through anything. And then actually if you're made to ask, well actually, you know, when you felt X before, what happened? And when you did Y before, what happened? And it allows them to actually think of things where they've actually managed to achieve something in the past. It helps to make them feel more empowered about what they can achieve in the future. So engaging their memory is the first step, and invoking their imagination is the second step. You want them to try and imagine how they could feel better and why it's good for them to think about changing their behaviour. And this really comes from questions, so you could ask them, what are you looking forward to about when you're feeling a bit lighter, or what are you going to be doing, with your increased energy, and what are you passionate about? And it allows them the idea that they can actually not only achieve something different, but that they've got things that they want to look forward to and do when they have achieved that thing. So the N in Blend It is no bossing. And this is the real hard one, isn't it? Well, for me it is anyway. Because I like to sometimes think, especially in years gone by, I know what's good for you. You just have to listen to me, do as I say, and everything's going to be great. It doesn't work that way. And it's tempting as doctors and healthcare professionals to think that it does, because we do so much, we spend a lot of time on this. We spend a lot of time learning and looking at the studies, and we think if we just tell them what to do, then they'll do it, and that's great. But actually, although we do have a powerful desire to fix things and make things right and make the world a better place and make people healthy, the most important advice I've ever been given in my professional career was to take my ego out of the consultation room completely and actually completely let go of the outcome. I have to let go of the outcome, and I'd advise you to do the same. It doesn't mean you don't care about your patient at all. Of course you can care about your patient. It just means that the decision to make a change is their decision. It comes from deep within them, and they have been empowered to do it rather than you telling them to do it. And there's some important reasons why this is my advice. And the main reason is because it works, and if you tell them what to do, it just doesn't. The reason for that is that we have a natural resistance to being told what to do. And when we're engaging in an unhealthy behaviour, there's a part of our brain that knows it's unhealthy and wants to make a change. And there's another part of our brain that wants to maintain the status quo and keep things safe, keep things the same. And when you voice the part of their brain that thinks they need to make a change, they have no option but to voice the part of their brain that wants things to stay the same. So essentially, for example, I'll give you an example. You say to your patient, research shows that whole food plant-based diets have been shown to reverse diabetes type 2. Why don't you cut out meat and dairy and see what your BMs are doing in 3 weeks' time? You could say that. And if you do, they'll say, well, yeah, that could be true, but, my family's never going to eat that rabbit food, and to be honest, I don't like the idea of it, and I just don't think I'm going to stick to it. Or you could say, studies show that exercise is really important for your mental health and well-being. Why don't you go out for a run 3 times a week and see how you feel in a month? You could say that. But then they'll say, well, yeah, that's probably true, but with my arthritis doctor, I know that I'm just going to make it worse if I even try and do that kind of exercise. So you see, you're forcing them to verbalise the part of their brain that wants things to stay the same. So you're essentially in the wrong role, and you're taking all of the good lines. What you need to do instead is allow them to speak about what changes they need in their lives. Allow them to speak the part of their brain that wants to make a change. And the other reason why that's really important is because we tend to believe what we hear ourselves say. So the more we say things, the more our brain believes that they're true. So how do we do this? We reinforce the changes that they suggest. So it's a bit like picking out all the beautiful flowers from the meadow of their words and giving it back to them in a beautiful bouquet that they can't deny because they were the ones that said it. So let me give you an example. Okay. Remember, your patient has to vocalise the arguments for change. So you could say, let's give you the example of excess drinking as a way of looking at this. You could say, tell me about your drinking habits. And they could say, oh, well, I have about, maybe 4 or 5 units a day. I come home from work, have a few beers and things like that. And you're kind of working it out in your head, and you're thinking, that's way above what they should be drinking. And you could start a lecture, couldn't you? You could start saying, well, let's work out the amount of units you're drinking, and I need to tell you that this is really unhealthy. Or you could say something like, okay, what do you think about drinking that much? And then they could say something like, well, I've never really thought about it, actually. No, but I suppose now I think about it, I have been feeling a bit sluggish in the mornings. And then you could say, what have you noticed? And then they can tell you a little bit more. They can say, oh, well, yeah, I just feel really tired when I wake up, and I notice that actually I get a little bit anxious and I'm a bit more grumpy with my family on days when I've had my wine in the evenings or whatever it is. And so with that conversation, you can reflect that back to them and you can say, oh, so what you're telling me is when you drink this many units a day, you notice that you feel sluggish in the mornings, you notice that you've had increased anxiety, and you notice that you're quite irritable with your family during the day. And they'd be like, oh my God, what? It's a way for them to understand and realise some of the consequences that they have noticed, but they've never really consciously decided to make a difference on. And even if they don't change something that day, it will encourage them to change something at some point in the future. And it will certainly be a much more effective tool, because the problem with the way of just telling them what to do is that you're actually entrenching them in a behaviour, because they're going to believe what they're saying about not being able to change. So it's actually far better to ask the open questions and to reflect the answers that they give you. Now, you will be hearing lots of different things about how to change behaviours, but you have to focus on what the patient believes they can do, and that's going to change person per person. So obviously, I talk about plant-based diets because I love talking about plant-based nutrition, but in my consultation, I will also talk about the power of the way that you think, the family relationships that you have, the things that you watch on the TV or Netflix, whether you smoke, whether you drink, whether you've got enough love in your life, whether you move your body, whether you go out in nature. These are all really important things, and so you have to start where your patient's at. If there is a pillar of lifestyle medicine where they believe they can begin, that's where you need to target your attention. And you do that with information. So we go back to the blend it formula. Believe they're capable of change. L, look and listen. E, evoke their imagination and their memory. N, no bossing. D, desire, build the desire in them to make a change. I stands for information, so blend it. I is information. Now, again, I'm self-promoting. That's my book. You can tell them if they are interested in plant-based nutrition, they could have a look at that. You can buy Eating Plant-Based, which is the book on the right. If you haven't already, I thoroughly recommend it. That's downstairs in the foyer. I really like the Rangan Chatterjee books. I think he's a lovely man. And there's a couple of great books that I often recommend to my patients, including Feel Better in 5, which is one of my favourites. And How to Go Plant-Based is a great book written by Ella Mills, who founded Deliciously Ella. She's also collaborated with a number of experts in writing this book, including Dr. Shireen Kassam, who is the founder of PBHB UK, Paula Hallam, who I don't know if she's here or not, but there she is. Oh yeah, hi. Paula, she wrote a chapter on child nutrition for that book. I wrote a chapter for that book. It's a lovely book, and it really does give you some simple, quick and easy family-friendly recipes, so I'd recommend that as well. We've got another couple of books here. Three. Three of these books are downstairs in the foyer if you want to get them. Lisa Simon's book on fertility. We've got Neetu. Is she here? There she is. Neetu Bajekal and her daughter Rohini wrote this amazing book, Living PCOS Free, which you can buy downstairs. And of course, the Feeding Your Vegan Child book, which is by Sandra Hood. That's downstairs too. Nourish is another one, and then of course you've got gut health books on the right. And if you are a plant-based athlete, you might like, or if your patients or clients are athletes, you might like to recommend the Plant-Based Power Plan, which is specifically for people with athletic goals. The Plant-Based Power Plan. It's by TJ Waterfall, who is an elite vegan sports nutritionist and a very nice person. I'm not going to go on too much longer. We do have a time limit, but there are plenty of resources you can give them, including the Happy Pair resources that I mentioned, and recipes and the Eat Well guide. Just remember to tailor it to what they ask for. T is timed. You need to give them a very specific time frame. It's a bit like those goals that you might make at work, the SMART goals. You need to make it very measurable and specific. And of course, they will need to be the ones to decide what they're going to do and when. But you will facilitate that. So that's a really important part of the step. And it allows them to actually make a simple, practical intervention that they choose and a time frame that they choose with your guidance. And like my patients, you will hopefully notice that some of your patients and clients are empowered to make these changes. And it is truly very encouraging. It's one of the things that I do love about practice. And it doesn't have to be massively time consuming. Remember, you can just plant a seed, a simple seed. And if it's got the right soil, the right amount of rain, the right amount of sunshine, it can grow into something beautiful. And if not, then it will just germinate for a while, and then later on someone else might say something that will allow it to grow. So please do not lose heart. And I would love for you now, I know that we're going to have a Q&A in a minute, but just take a moment, if you will, to think about if there's one thing that I have said today that you would like to remember and take into your practice next week. When you go back and see patients and clients next week, think, is there one thing that you are going to do now that might be different from what you've been doing before, that's going to make a big difference to your working life? If we have time, you can tell me, Claire, if we do, they can tell their neighbour what that one thing is to reinforce it, because we tend to believe what we hear ourselves say. If not, then we can move on to the next thing. And a big thank you very much to every single one of you for being here today. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you. So I think you should stand up and turn. Julie Stewart. Julie is a nutritional therapist and a pharmacy technician who also has her own very interesting story to tell. So today she's going to talk to us about sustainable health with a whole food plant-based diet. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you, everyone. Wow, we've reached the last talk of the day, and what an inspiring day it's been so far. Thanks so much to Gemma for those heartwarming patient stories. It's always wonderful to hear, and this really interesting information that we've had from Emily as well today. So I've been invited just to share a little bit about my story, my weight loss journey with the plant-based diet, and to briefly touch on calorie density, and then to share one of my own one-to-one clinic stories, patient journeys as well. So I decided to switch my role from dispensing pharmaceutical medicines to prescribing diet and lifestyle as a way to help people manage their symptoms, improve their health, reduce the risk factors of disease, and even reverse chronic disease. Like many of us who've been driven to study, we've been here from our own stories. And I want to share my story, as I say. This was me at the very start of me waking up to the fact that I needed to start looking after my health. I had multiple chronic diseases, and despite several prescription medications, I never seemed to improve. So I knew that I needed to lose weight. I was aware of the long-term risks of obesity. I tried every diet going over the years, from low-carb Atkins to F-Plan, Zone, 5-2, Slimming Group Worlds, weekly weigh-ins, all sorts. And I knew I should be eating more plants, but I craved muffins, not green beans. Hello, my name's Julie, and I'm a food addict. I was really against exercise as well. But by my 40th birthday, I'd managed to yo-yo my way down to a reasonable weight. But my big wake-up call was a 2-week hospital stay with a severe bowel infection and a diagnosis of diverticulitis. I was discharged with advice from my consultant to increase fibre in my diet and take yet more medication. Well, I was desperate for a solution, and that's when I discovered a whole food, plant-based way of eating, based on the Super 8, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, whole grains and legumes. Within a year of eating this way, I'd healed all my symptoms and come off all medications. Absolutely amazed at the power. Thank you. I really wanted to shout it from the rooftops and share it with other people. And I'm proud to say that I've managed to keep my weight stable for a decade and a half now. I feel fitter than ever. And the best part is, I still get to eat muffins. Yay! And here's one of my favourite muffin recipes. And if you're a muffin lover like me, take a screenshot of this because this is a beaut. Sadly, my story is not unusual. You know, since the obesity epidemic started in the 1980s, we've been led to believe that the best way to lose weight is by continuously dieting. Hence, we have a £1 billion diet weight loss industry. Half of the population are trying to lose weight, and you know, the other half are actually obese. So something we're doing is not working. Now, do we lose weight if we follow a calorie-controlled diet? Well, according to the research, the answer is no. Research consistently shows that calorie deficits diet work, but only in the short term. So, you know, most people lose about 5 to 10% of their body weight, of their starting weight, within the first 6 months of dieting. But unfortunately, it doesn't stay off. According to one comparison of 14 popular diets with a focus on cardiovascular disease risk, they found that any of the health benefits and cardiovascular disease risk benefits largely disappeared after a year. And other studies have shown that in normal weight people who are dieting is actually a predictor of future weight gain. So maybe we should focus on health and not weight loss. So what's the best diet for health? Well, we hear so many variations of eating patterns, don't we? It's really hard to distinguish which is actually best for our health. And an annual review of public health stated that a diet of predominantly plants close to nature is associated with disease prevention and health promotion. So we kind of all agree on that one. Another study found that changes in body weight and results for overweight individuals following a plant-based diet were largely due to the changes in gut microbiota. But truth is, you know, there have been no long-term, robust studies on what could be contenders for best diet. And for various reasons, you know, bias and confounding, it's unlikely that we ever will get those studies. So what's the answer to eating healthfully and maintaining any weight loss? Well, the first part of the answer is accepting that we probably are looking at something that's completely different to anything that we may have learned or experienced before. And the second part of the solution is accepting that we're all different. So it's going to take a real transformation. So a personalised and supportive approach is key. Now, this brings me to, in my experience, that the best way to lose weight is actually to eat a lot of the right type of food. And this is where calorie density comes in. So calorie density is the measure of the calorie content of a food relative to its weight or volume. And as you can see from this chart, foods vary from the lower end of the scale, non-starchy green leafy vegetables and salads weighing in at around 100 calories per pound, right up to the end of the scale where we've got fats and oils like olive oil and butter weighing in at 4,000 calories per pound. So we've got a 40-fold difference in calorie density between some foods. Now, the average human research shows that we tend to consistently eat the same volume of food every day. That's around 3 to 5 pounds in weight. And the average stomach can expand to about 4 cups of food per meal, although I think mine can expand further. So basic maths would tell us that if we eat the foods that are to the lower end of the scale, or the majority of our calories, then we get to eat more but take in less calories. Does that mean that we have to completely exclude the more higher dense calorie foods? No. Foods like avocado and nuts and seeds, as we know, are really healthful, but small amounts of these are best, and from whole plant food sources. So a stomach full of strawberry ice cream, for example, could max out our 2,000 calorie intake for the day, whereas the equivalent 2,000 calories in berries, in strawberries, would be 44 cups of berries. That's 11 stomachfuls. As delicious as strawberries are, I don't think even I could eat that much. So by changing the type of foods that we eat, we get to eat whenever we're hungry, eat until we're full, and we can still lose weight and keep it off forever. So what's the next thing you want to eat when you eat a Pringle? Exactly. Unlike Pringles, filling up on enough of these high nutrient whole foods will fill you up for a few reasons. First of all, they don't contain the addictive and appetite-stimulating substances, salt, oil, and sugar, that make us eat more and keep us going back for another Pringle. They're full of fibre, which means that we're full up. Stretch receptors are activated in our stomach and send signals to our brain telling us we're full and to stop eating. They're loaded with nutrients, and also within those plants, we've got certain compounds like thylakoids in green leafy vegetables, for example, that switch off the appetite. And lastly, they're loaded with water, yet another thing to switch off the appetite. So eating a lot of these foods are going to be really key if you're trying to lose weight. Now, just lastly to say that there's been some studies done on how our gut microbiome actually harvests the energy from these foods a lot differently to other less high fibre foods. So us vegans love to take pictures of our food, don't we? And why wouldn't you when you have such wonderful, colourful and tasty combinations? And, you know, the thing is, it can be overwhelming to say to somebody, this is what I want you to start eating, and expect them to just go away and whip up all these wonderful recipes from scratch. You know, one of my values is simplicity. So it's about the journey for that person, that individual person, what's going to work for them. And it might be just as simple as teaching them how to cook maybe a few dishes from basic ingredients and then building variety around that. So that personalised approach is really key. And I'm going to end with a case study of someone who I saw recently in my clinic. And we'll call her Penny. She was referred to me from the London Migraine Clinic because she was suffering from chronic migraines, 2 a week on average. And she had lots of other health issues, as you can see listed here. And she was obese. She was creeping into the obese category, and she'd been trying to lose weight for about 10 years. She was on lots of different medications, 3 different types of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and she had lots of gut health issues as well. She was on medication for that. She wasn't sleeping well. She had fatigue. Her current diet consisted of lots of animal protein and salty, oily snacks, and she loved her desserts too. She'd recently relocated with her job, which she found quite stressful. But she actually loved fruits and vegetables, so that was a good basis to start with. And a whole food plant-based or low-fat plant-based diet naturally lends itself to being really helpful for migraine sufferers because it's anti-inflammatory, full of hydrating foods, and full of the key nutrients that are needed to support reduction in migraine symptoms. So these are some of the key dietary interventions and lifestyle interventions that I advised Penny about. First of all, we cut out refined sugars. That's always a quick win, but replacing them, switching them out for some healthier alternatives, so chia seed pudding, dates, fresh fruit, cinnamon seed bars, and replacing any sugary drinks with some green smoothies. And also increasing complex carbohydrates as well. Dysregulated blood glucose levels are really common in migraines, and they can be a trigger for some people who suffer from migraines, and this was the case for Penny. So we really wanted to stabilise her blood glucose levels. And insulin resistance is also really common in migraineurs as well, even in the non-obese category, which leads to the comorbidities. They're much more susceptible to type 2 diabetes. And we cut out cheese. Cheese was an addiction for Penny. She was a self-reported cheese addict, like many people are. And I know when people first go plant-based, that's the one thing they say to me is, I can't give up cheese. But we gave some alternatives, such as tofu cottage cheese and some nice potato-based cheesy sauce recipes. Cutting out cheese with its high saturated fat and salt content's a quick win for weight loss. And then Penny often found herself reaching for a coffee as a pick-me-up in the afternoons, which could have been affecting her sleep. And also probably, again, every time you have a coffee, it sends a burst of cortisol into your bloodstream, which raises your glucose levels temporarily again. So we switched out coffee for dandelion root coffee, which if any of you have ever tried that, it is a really good replacement for caffeinated coffee. And the next thing we did was increase all fruits and vegetables, but particularly green leafy vegetables, for several reasons. They're a great source of magnesium, and lowered magnesium levels have been found to be increased likelihood of migraines. And also, they're the best source of folate. So dietary folate, higher levels of which have been found to make sure that people have less migraines. And they're a great source of coenzyme Q10 as well, which low serum levels of CoQ10 have been found to be more common in people with migraines. And linked with sort of fewer episodes of migraines and mitochondrial dysfunction as well, affecting energy. So we made sure that we included a healthy source of protein at every meal. Now, whilst Penny wasn't quite at the stage where she was ready to go fully plant-based, I encouraged her to switch out many of her animal-based proteins for the healthier plant-based proteins, which again helped her feel fuller for longer and further stabilised her blood glucose levels. The amino acid tryptophan, as Emily said, is the precursor to serotonin, which would also is also linked to fewer episodes of migraines. And some migraine sufferers may have an increased need for vitamin B2 or riboflavin. So some good sources of this are nuts and green leafy vegetables, again, tofu and mushrooms. We put in some helpful herbs and spices. So ginger has been found to have the ability to suppress a migraine from starting, and if taken regularly may even have a prophylactic effect. One randomised control study found that just 1/8 of a teaspoon of powdered ginger can actually work as well as one of the triptan medications, obviously without the side effects. Penny liked ginger tea, and we also added some fresh ginger root to her green smoothie. Turmeric, often known for traditionally used for its anti-inflammatory effects, and it's together in one study, curcumin and CoQ10 was found to be more effective at preventing migraines than either of them alone. So cooking up a dish like curries or lentil dal that uses these spices along with some greens was a good strategy for Penny. And cinnamon, again, anti-inflammatory and has an effect on preprandial blood glucose levels. So we added a teaspoon of cinnamon to Penny's morning oats. Fermented foods, not to forget these, we just added in some regular amounts of sauerkraut and some sugar-free, plant-based cultured yogurt. For two reasons, helps improve digestion in terms of microbial diversity and also decreases inflammatory signals in the gut. So, Penny's results were astounding. After 3 months, she'd had a total of 7 kilogram weight loss, which is a nice steady amount. Her migraines were down to once a month, and the one migraine that she'd had was down to her skipping a meal at work. She had quite a pressured job and sometimes forgot to eat. It was easily resolved with naproxen, which was a far cry from her the way that her migraines used to go on for days and days. In fact, all her symptoms across the board had improved. Her gut symptoms, her sleep was better, her anxiety had improved, and even her hormonal balance. So I gave Penny some strategies to maybe not rely on the painkillers next time for when she felt a migraine coming on. And they were just to keep some emergency foods with her at all times, really simple, but just keep some fresh fruit on your desk at work, or keep a batch of cacao energy bliss balls in the fridge at work for those times where she hadn't taken a packed lunch and she couldn't nip out to the shops. We carried on the work on circadian rhythm support that had been really useful for Penny, just really simply, exposing her eyes to bright daylight in the morning and keeping the lighting dim in the evening. Had some really good results, so I advised Penny to get a natural daylight lamp for the winter months. And also, yoga is another amazing strategy for helping with less pain, frequency and duration of migraines. It's got some good research done on that. Also, pranayama, alternate nostril breathing, and the use of essential oils, peppermint and lavender. And this is one of my favourite YouTube videos that you can do at home that incorporates all of those techniques. So lastly, check out the top 10 tips for weight management, Plant-Based Health Professionals UK website. And it's really great to hear of so many inspiring stories of people turning their lives around through plant-based or plant-strong diets. I want you to think that we can change things. We live in a world where 2/3 of the population is overweight or obese. 1/3 of our kids are expected to get diabetes in their lifetime, which is a bleak picture. But I urge you to remain optimistic, because an optimist is not somebody who can't see challenges. It's somebody who knows that there are ways to overcome the challenges. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was inspiring. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're already over time, so we're just going to have a very short Q&A session. I just want to address one question that's been upvoted several times about the mice study that Emily included. Unfortunately, we did ask the speakers not to include mice studies, but because it was a recorded session, it was quite hard to get her to completely re-record for that. So I do apologise for the mice studies. Gemma, we've had a couple of questions about, both people with children in terms of your interviewing technique and people with disabilities and things, how you manage to cope with those sort of situations.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Do I need to... Can you just hear me as I speak?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's different with children and people with learning disabilities because you have to meet someone where they're at. And obviously with children, they have parents that provide them with their nutrition. And people with learning disabilities, it may be more of a challenge for them to do things like cook for themselves, for example. So I think that that's a different strategy, and it would really depend on their individual circumstances. Is somebody living in shared accommodation? Are they living at home with family members? Are they living alone? Do they have wardens? Do they have residential care? So, there's a lot of different factors to consider. And again, with children, then I think eating more plant-based is something that I tend to encourage because generally speaking, it seems to reduce their risk of things like respiratory infections, as well as later on in life reducing their risk of things like heart diseases and cancer. So it's a general positive shift, and if the parents are excited about making those shifts, then clearly they're going to want to do that with their children as well. So there are a number of resources for children eating more plant-based. I wrote a chapter on it in my book. There's a chapter on it in the How to Go Plant-Based book. And there's also the book by Brenda Davis called Nourish, as well as the book by Sandra Hood that you can buy here today. And Paula Hallam, who can wave to you if you turn around, also does parent consultations for those that want their children to eat more plant-based. I suppose a basic principle would be if you provide the foods on the dinner table, maybe get the kids to prepare the foods with you, get excited about what you're making. Don't give them too much choice, maybe a couple of things to choose from that you're actually going to cook. And then they can choose how much of it they eat. The advice is generally different for children with neurodiverse needs because there may be some specific dietary requirements and proclivities. There may be certain food restriction behaviours there which would need more specialist support.
Okay, and the other most popular question is, Gemma, could you give us an example of how you approached broaching the idea of plant-based diets in the clinics to the people you showed on the video?
Yeah, so, with the people in the video, it's really working through what was important to them. So there was a question I saw earlier, what's the first thing you ask? Well, I ask what's actually important to them. And a lot of the time, when you ask them what's important, they'll tell you, and it's not necessarily what you think is most important. So it's helpful to know. And if they want to focus, so for example, Perry, who shared his story, he just wanted to be able to get back to work. He loved his job, he lost his license. So that was his massive motivating factor at that time. And then, of course, I wanted to give him the most powerful tools that would allow him to do that. Medication as well as diet, I should point out, although he didn't want to take medications at that stage, he was keen to try a dietary approach. So it was a bit tricky because I always try and provide people with anything that I can in my toolbox. And of course, medications provide a very important role to play. In his case, his blood pressure dropped very dramatically in less than, or just over a week, from 180 over 120 down to 120 over 80. Now, you wouldn't necessarily expect such a dramatic drop in all of your patients because it depends on other factors in their lives, whether they smoke, their age, and so on. But when he saw that it was so powerful, that really was very exciting for him. He got his license back, he was able to get back to work. So that's not going to be someone else's motivation. Someone else is going to want to, I don't know, walk their daughter down the aisle at their wedding, or be able to get through a weekend playing with their children where they couldn't do that before for whatever reason. So you ask them what's important to them, and then you take it from there. And dietary changes are usually an easy win because they can be implemented quickly and they can see fast results sometimes, most of the time.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about kidney disease. So I just want to let you know that we've got Angeline Taylor, who's a registered dietitian specialist for kidneys, speaking tomorrow in here between 12 and 1:20. There's a session preserving our vital organs for healthy ageing. So there'll be much more detailed stuff about kidneys then. I think probably the final question, we're nearly 10 minutes over. Julie, I think this one's aimed at you. What are your thoughts on artificial sweeteners, such as aspartame in Diet Cola?
I would avoid like the plague if you can, because there is some research around how they, although they don't spike blood glucose levels, they can trick the brain into thinking that it's going to get sugar, and then that will trigger any sugar cravings in yourself. So if you're going to have sugary things, don't deny yourself sugary things, because like we have a natural sweet tooth as human beings, but fresh fruits, getting those or dried fruits if you really want even more sweetness, getting your cravings satisfied in other ways through whole plant foods. It's that fibre that's going to slow down the release of sugar into your bloodstream. So I would definitely avoid the sweeteners and use whole foods as replacements.
Thank you. Go on, did you want to say something?
Well, I like to add, I think I agree with a lot of what you said. I think the brain can kind of get kind of fixed on sugary tastes, and so it makes it easier if you cut them out. Although I would say there was recently a reclassification of sweeteners as being potentially carcinogenic. They were also in the same category as other things like mobile phone use. So I think ultimately, when we look at dietary studies and what helps people lose weight, if you are someone that is making a lot of dietary changes but then relies on that treat Diet Coke once a week or twice a week, the studies do show that it can help with your weight loss goals to have 0 calories in a drink rather than a Diet Coke that is normal sugar. So I think it's about finding that balance of what your patient can achieve at that time. And I think encouraging whole foods and actual, real foods is amazing. But yeah, I think...
Yeah, again, it's going back to the individual story, isn't it? Yeah. All right, well, we're going to let you get downstairs. Hopefully you'll join us for some drinks downstairs. And thank you very much to the speakers.